The fighter, D&D's original hero. But over TSR's lifespan, this boring class changed way more than you think. The hit points, strength bonuses, armor, damage, but also just how they fight. So what happened to the most iconic class in Dungeons & Dragons? Let's find out today on Daddy Rolled a One. Hello there, and welcome back. I'm Martin, and this is another video in my series on the history of early tabletop role-playing games, including Dungeons & Dragons. Now, today's video is going to become part of my playlist on the history of D&D classes. I'll put a link to that playlist up here in the upper right-hand corner, because today we're going to be talking specifically about the fighter. From its debut in original Dungeons & Dragons from 1974, all the way through second edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, which first came out in 1989, but it lasted all the way up until Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, which by that point had acquired TSR, released third edition in the year 2000. So I'm not going to be delving into the WotC Hasbro era, 3, 3.5, 4E, and 5th edition in this particular video, because I tend to focus more on the history, and I really kind of wanted to just talk about how the class changed and evolved during the TSR era of Dungeons & Dragons. So again, that's from 1974 through, essentially 1997. But if you are interested in like a follow-up video to talk about how the fighter changed in those WotC era editions, definitely leave it in the notes below and I'll consider it. I just have kind of found over time that most people are more focused on wanting to learn about the TSR era, which is totally fine. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and going through all these different editions that TSR published during this time period. Some of them are not unique editions. They're sort of like add-ons to the current edition at the time. And we're going to talk about essentially like a first level fighter. So we're going to look at what a first level fighter looks like in each of these different editions in terms of things like their average starting hit points and their average armor class, assuming that they're going to start out with just chainmail and shield. I was trying to just pick something kind of easy and neutral that a first level fighter could probably afford. And then what their attack bonus is based on their class and what their damage would be, assuming that they're using a sword. And we're going to get into some definitions here where we have to start specifying what kind of sword, but at the beginning we didn't need to, and we'll talk about that as we go through this video. And then I'm going to make some assumptions on what the stats are for these different fighters, for these first level fighters. So they're all going to have a constitution of 16. They're going to have a dexterity of 15. And then they're going to have a strength of 18. Now, in some of the editions, that strength of 18 is going to be modified again, and I'll talk about that as well as we get there and why that was. But that will help us determine what the bonuses are, if any, to their hit points based on their con, to their armor class based on their dex, and then to their hit rolls and damage based on their strength. And then we're going to look at what point did these fighters improve in their combat ability to hit, to gain a bonus to attack. And then at what point did they gain multiple attacks per round? And then we're going to look at how many experience points they needed to get to second level, which will be, I think, kind of fun. So that's going to be the bulk of this particular video. I think it'll go pretty fast. I am going to talk also a little bit about in each edition how the fighter is described, what it says that the fighter is or what the fighter does. And as when it's available within the description, we'll kind of look at the art and see how the fighter was depicted throughout time, and we'll kind of see that change as the artists and the art style and the trade dress of TSR changes over time as well. So that's going to be the majority of the video up front. And then after that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea of, I'm going to use a generic term here and call them combat maneuvers, but the idea of implementing mechanics for fighters to do things in combat that seem like they're a little bit beyond the normal, just I hit it with my sword kind of thing. So that started, it's been around forever, but I'm just going to focus on a few things like the BECMI companion set, and we'll talk about that. But then also, I want to look at some OSR style games. So I'm going to look at Castles and Crusades, Old School Essentials, and Dungeon Crawl Classics, each of which deal with this kind of idea in a different way. But the idea is coming from the same place, but the implementation is different. And it just might give you some ideas if this is something that you're looking to add to your games. And then at the very end, I will deal with how can you make your fighters unique without mechanical differences? You don't always need to have mechanics, so you can do it through different ways and still have a unique fighter that's fun and different from everybody else. And so I'll talk about that at the very end of the video. Now, I do believe that I'm going to have time as well before I get to the bonus content at the end to have like a special secondary bonus content. And it's going to be an unboxing video that's related to a video that I made before. And I'll just tell you right now, it was the Arduin Trilogy video that I did. And I got some really nice goodies from the folks who currently publish the Arduin Grimoire, who own the rights. And so I recorded myself unboxing some stuff that they sent me, and I thought it would be fun to show here on the channel. So it's not going to be a review or anything. It's just literally showing what was in the box. So that'll be at the very end of the video. So make sure to stick around for that. Now, if all that sounds fun to you, then I would encourage you to please take a few seconds to like the video, double check to make sure that you've subscribed to the channel, and adjust the settings on that bell icon so that YouTube will notify you when I upload new videos. All right, so let's dive in and talk about, why are we talking about this in the first place, really? And I think it's because I think fighters get short shrift. A lot of people kind of think the fighter is boring, but the fighter was one of the original 3 classes in the game, and understanding the changes that were being made to the fighter, because it's one of the first classes that starts to get changed a lot very, very quickly. And it shows the change in the design philosophy of, TSR as a whole, but Gary Gygax specifically, who makes a lot of these initial changes, and kind of shows like where the industry was moving and changing to. And it's a really fascinating look at, like, if you just pick the one class to look at the fighter, it makes it easy to see these design decisions that are being made over time, and all within the same rough system they're all kind of equivalent, but not really. We've talked about that before. So I have a whole series on the differences in D&D editions, and going through that might help to kind of understand some of these different things that we have. So definitely you want to check that out later. You don't need to have watched it to watch this video. As with all my videos, this one stands alone. But if you want additional context, that one might help. So let's go ahead and look at the fighter from original D&D, 1974. So this is the book Men and Magic. And right from the cover, we have a depiction of a fighter. Now, this isn't the original art. I don't believe. I don't think the cover was either. I should have checked that before we got in the video. But the original art, I think, was a little bit different. And they replaced it as they got into later printings of the books, because the original art was essentially a copy of a comic book picture. And I think TSR wanted to kind of change that. But we have this fighter here. Okay, and as we get into the text, we're going to see one of the first changes is that it wasn't called a fighter. It was called a fighting man, or 3 main classes of characters: fighting men, magic users, and clerics. Those are the only 3. And fighting men, says, includes the characters of elves and dwarves and even hobbits. Now, let's just talk about this term fighting men. So first off, I think it's clunky. I came into the game with an edition that called it fighters. So when I went backwards and saw original D&D and saw fighting men, to me, it just sounded weird. It's an older term, and there's been a lot of discussion over the years as to where this term came from and why was it used in Dungeons and Dragons. So it's just right out the gate, it is not intended to be sexist. So in this case, the term, like saying men, it means humans, right? So if you think of like that quote from the orc chief guy in Return of the King, where he says, like, the age of man is over, now is the time of the orc, or whatever that phrase is. You guys know what I'm talking about. So when he says the age of man is over, he means the age of humans is over. I think most people get that, but I did have one person in the comments at one point that was questioning that, and I had to explain that no, like an older way of talking about this, when you say man, you just mean humans, right? So but still, fighting man just sounds like it's not a common term that we would use. Well, I have seen a few things. So one is from some books. So in the John Carter of Mars series, I think it was the Princess of Mars book. There's a quote, and I wrote it down here. I mean, I'm not going to read the whole quote, but it was something in there, and the quote says that John Carter had the carriage of a trained fighting man. And then if you go to Hour of the Dragon, this is a Conan the Barbarian book. There's a quote where he's talking to this woman, and Conan's been trying to disguise himself. And she says, "You are not a priest," she said. "You are a fighting man." So a lot of people say that it comes from that. It comes from these books that were both listed in the Appendix N of Dungeons and Dragons as being influential texts. That could be. But also, I think just in a more generic sense, I've also seen people say, I think it was John Peterson that made this argument that, in the Middle Ages, you had kind of three types of people. You had those who work, those who pray, and those who fight. And so if you think of it that way as a classification of like, what is it that you do in the world? Well, a fighting man is a person that gets by in life by fighting, is someone he's one of those who fight, right? So that could be a sort of like trying to categorize this, because you have those who pray as clerics, and then instead of having those who work, because it's not fun to play just like a worker person, like a farmer or a serf or whatever, you have those who use magic as your third kind of characteristic of class. And that's the difference, I think, with the way we think of classes now versus classes in original Dungeons and Dragons. If you remember in Blackmore, which is, I think, the most influential work to create be the inspiration for the game of Dungeons and Dragons. So Blackmore doesn't have classes the way that Dungeons and Dragons does. It has roles or archetypes where people would show up, and Dave Arnos would tell them, like, give them a sheet of paper, say, you're going to play this person. And, sometimes they would ask them, like, hey, can I play someone like this? But they weren't classes the way that we think of classes now. And the use of the word class in original Dungeons and Dragons, it's really closer to like shorthand for classification or type. So what type of character are you? And are you someone who uses magic? Are you someone who fights? Or are you someone who prays? Okay, so those are the different kinds of things. Over time, the definition of classes become much more narrow to be like a specific thing, but in the original terms, it was much broader. That's why the term magic user makes so much sense. It's a clunky term. You wouldn't necessarily think someone would walk around saying, I'm a magic user, but it was intended to be a catch-all of a class of person who uses magic to get by in life and to make their way through life, right? So that's the term kind of like fighting man here. So I've also seen classes described as sort of like the way that we would rank different types of ships in the Navy, to say like it's a class such and such ship. And so there's a lot of naval war game inspiration that comes into Dungeons and Dragons. That could be a whole video in and of itself, armor class and saving throws and all this kind of stuff, right? So again, the term fighting man was just sort of like this generic term to just mean that it's a person who gets by with fighting. Instead of calling it a fighting person, they called it a fighter man, but it wasn't intended to be gender specific. Okay, but it says, now this is how they describe it in original Dungeons and Dragons, which it's not a great description, but it says all magical weaponry is usable by fighters. So see, they even call them fighters here. It says, and this is in itself a big advantage. In addition, they gain the advantage of more hit dice, in parentheses, the score of which determines how many points of damage can be taken before characters killed. They can only use a very limited number of magical items of the non-weapon variety. However, they can use no spells. Top-level fighters, lords and above, who build castles are considered barons, and as such, they may invest in their holdings in order to increase their income. See the investments section of Volume 3. Base income for a baron is a tax rate of 10 gold pieces per inhabitant of the barony per game year. So that's it. That's your description of fighters, which is not really a description, which is too bad. But that is what they say here. So let's get into our look at what does a first level fighter or fighting man in original Dungeons and Dragons look like. Again, I made a little chart here. And okay, so in terms of their average starting hit points, so I'm just going to do average. And the average fighting man in original Dungeons and Dragons would start out with 4.5 hit points. Now, how did I calculate that number? Well, I'm going to look at this chart here that says dice for cumulative hits. This is what's going to tell us how many hit dice they have. And you see that a level 1 fighter or fighting man, which is a veteran, is going to have 1 + 1. What that means is 1d6 plus an additional point. So how do I know it's a d6? Because in original Dungeons and Dragons, every character class uses d6 for hit points. And the reason I know that is because it doesn't tell you what die you're supposed to use. And so the default assumption is that you're using a d6. So fighting men, magic users, and clerics all use a d6 for their hit points. Okay. So, and the fighter just gets an original +1 at first level. You see a magic user gets an additional +1 at second level. So they just get an additional point at second level. They don't roll. Okay. So average score of d6 is 3.5, right? And then you add that +1 for 4.5. Okay, now, but I did mention that they were going to have a constitution of 16. So what does that get us? Well, now we're going to flip back to the section here on ability scores. And if I look here, I see that if you have a constitution of 15 or more, you get to add +1 to each hit die. Okay, so this fighter then would have a starting hit points of 5.5, average starting hit points of 5.5, because he or she will get to add 1 for having a high constitution. Now let's look at armor class. What kind of armor class are they going to have if they're using chainmail and shield? Well, they're going to have armor class 4. Remember, in all editions of TSR Dungeons and Dragons, so that's everything up until the release of the Wizards of the Coast 3rd edition in the year 2000, D&D uses descending armor class. Lower is better. So no armor or shield is a base of 9. And then you're going to count down to the best armor class you could have would be plate armor with shield, which is going to be armor class 2. So chainmail and shield is going to give us armor class 4. Okay, now what kind of bonus are they going to get for having a high dexterity? Well, remember I mentioned that we're going to assume that this character has a dexterity of 15. So we're going to go back here to our chart that shows us the bonuses that you get for the different ability scores. And we're going to see that a dexterity score above 12 means that we fire any missile at +1. There is no mention of armor class. So this character in original D&D gets no benefit from having a high dexterity to their armor class. The only thing that's going to give them is +1 if they're firing a missile weapon. Okay, now let's continue to look at what kind of attack bonus are they going to get based on their class. I am going to skip over the standard combat system in OD&D, which is the chainmail system, and we're going to use the alternative combat system, which is the one that we've all come to know as being the D&D combat system. Okay, and we see the attack matrix 1 is men attacking. So this is 20-sided dice score to hit by level. So let's just look at what you need to hit no armor or shield, and you need a 10 if you're level 1 through 3. And then it says fighting men. Okay, so this table is for fighting men, even though it says it's anybody attacking. Then it says magic users advance in steps based on 5 levels per group. So they don't do level 1 to 3, 4 to 6, or 7 to 9. They do levels 1 to 5, 6 through 10, etc. And clerics go in steps based on 4. So they would do levels 1 through 4, then 5 through 8. So a fighter is going to have the same attack bonus for level 1 through 3, and it's not going to improve until they are 4th level. And then between 4th and 6th level, they're going to get a +2 to their attack. As you see here looking at this table, that's essentially what that means, right? So if you needed a 10 to hit armor class 9 at levels 1 through 3, and you need an 8 to hit armor class 9 at levels 4 through 6, that's technically a +2 bonus, right? Then it's going to jump to +3 at the next group of levels from 7 through 9. Then it's going to jump +2, levels 10 through 12. Then levels 13 through 15, it's going to jump +2. And then 16 plus, it doesn't really change for no armor or shield, but you will see changes for the higher level armor classes like plate armor and shield. So if you are listening right now instead of watching, I apologize. It's very difficult to explain this table without just showing it. So the gist of it is that fighters progress in their fighting ability in groups of 3. Okay, so by three levels, 1 through 3, 4 through 6, etc. Okay, so that's their attack bonus that they're going to get at first level, which is technically 0, right? We're going to flatten that out and say that's a 0 bonus because all characters attack the same at levels 1 through 3. Whether you're a magic user, cleric, or fighter, you need a 10 to hit armor class 9, no armor or shield. Okay, and then what bonus are they going to get based on their strength? Let's go back to that table that we were looking at before. Nothing. There's nothing listed here for strength. So as you see, the only bonuses that we're going to see here are for constitution and for dexterity. Now, there is a separate thing for charisma when it's going to tell you what our loyalty base and maximum number of hirelings can be based on our charisma score. This is the only score, charisma, that really does much of anything in original Dungeons & Dragons. Okay, so no bonus to hit based on having that 18 strength. It's irrelevant. The only thing it's really going to do for a fighter is give them a bonus to their experience points because it's a prime requisite. They're going to get 10% more on their experience points. Okay, so how much damage are they going to do with a sword? Okay, well, let's look at our equipment list here. And we see that there's no specification for sword. It's just sword. That's it. It's not long sword, short sword, two-handed sword. It's just sword. There is a two-handed sword listed separately, but we're going to use sword. Well, how much damage does it do? It doesn't tell us. Okay, it's not on this table here. And that is because in original Dungeons & Dragons, every weapon does d6 points of damage. So it doesn't matter if you're using a dagger, hand axe, mace, sword, battle axe, morningstar, flail. Even if you're using a two-handed sword, d6 damage. Okay, so that means that this fighter, on average, is going to do 3.5 points of damage per round. And again, there's no strength bonus for added damage in original Dungeons & Dragons. So 3.5 points of damage per round. So the difference is this: you have to remember, this is all coming out of wargaming roots, these very specific mechanical rules, not the role-playing aspects, which is really what Blackmore's bringing to us a lot, is that level of changing the game. But the rules mechanics, Gary's adding a lot of stuff based on wargame rules, which use lots of rolls of d6s. So if every character has a d6 for their starting hit points and every weapon does a d6 for damage, it's kind of like equaling out. It's sort of saying that a first level character on average can withstand one hit. A fighter is a little bit stronger, so the fighter getting that d6 plus 1 for their hit points at first level, well, that plus 1 might give them that slight little edge, which means they might get by with surviving 2 hits. Or, at least surviving the first hit, we'll put it that way. But other characters, most likely, if a character gets hit, they're going to die based on the weapon doing d6 damage. Okay, so it was sort of that equal and balanced thing, and that was sort of how those earlier war games were played. And then, of course, that's going to change over time. But that's really what's going to happen with this fighter. So we already talked about the attack increases that they're going to get. At what point do those get better? And we saw it's every 3 levels. So at 4th level, this fighter's going to get better at attacking. And then at what point do they get multiple attacks? When can the fighter in original D&D attack more than once per round? They can't. It's not part of the rules. Okay, so they're not going to attack more than once per round. Now we're going to address that in just a second. But then let's look at how much XP, how many experience points does this fighter need to advance in level? And it's right here. They need 2,000 to go from a veteran to a warrior. Warrior is a 2nd level fighter. Okay, so remember that number 2,000. It's going to come up pretty frequently through this discussion. So that is our look at the original Dungeons & Dragons fighter. Now, however, a couple things are going to change. In 1975, so again, just a year after the publication of original D&D, Greyhawk is going to come out, 1975, and it's going to make a lot of changes. So I have a whole video about Greyhawk, but to me, for my money, this book right here, this supplement, is the book that changed D&D more than any other book in the history of the game, because this supplement makes D&D so much closer to even 5th edition now versus original D&D. It's going to make all these changes that are going to be things that we all think of as just being a core part of the game, but they didn't exist until the supplement came out. And we're going to talk about that next. Okay, so what changes are going to be made to the fighter in here? Well, they're going to be pretty substantial. So again, we're still calling it Fighting Men. This is original D&D, and it says other character types may engage in hand-to-hand combat, but only true fighting men are able to use their strength and dexterity to utmost advantage in melee. And then it says, in addition, certain lawful fighters may opt to become paladins. We're not going to talk about paladins in this. I'm going to keep it on fighting men. But on the cover, we have what would appear to me here to be another fighting man, fighting the Beholder. This is the first appearance of the Beholder in the Greyhawk supplement. Okay, so what are we going to learn about the fighters in this particular book? Under determination of abilities, additions, and changes, it's going to say strength also aids the fighting man in his ability to both score a hit upon an adversary and damage it. The strength must be raw, that is, not altered by intelligence scores. Okay, so what does that mean? So in original D&D and a lot of the early TSR versions of the game, you were rolling your ability scores in order down the line. So the order of the ability scores was strength, intelligence, wisdom. I think constitution usually came next. Constitution, dexterity, and charisma. At a certain point, dexterity and constitution are going to swap. But the point of this is that you were rolling in order. Now, why was it strength, intelligence, and wisdom? Because those were the prime requisites for strength fighters, intelligence magic users, and wisdom clerics. So that's why it was in that order. But you rolled 3d6, it's called 3d6 down the line. And you rolled in order and you just got what you got and you didn't get upset about it. You just kind of, created your character. But the thing is, because the ability scores didn't really do a whole lot for your character other than give you a bonus or penalty on your experience points if it was your prime requisite. So if you had a high strength as a fighter, you got a bonus to your experience points. And if you had a low strength for a fighter, the only thing that it affected was that you took a penalty on your experience points. So it would take you longer to advance, but it didn't affect your combat. Well, a lot of people would swap ability scores by trading them in on a point value. So fighters could trade in a certain number of points, and it's going to vary by edition. And I don't remember off the top of my head what the trade-offs were. In some cases, it's trading 2 for 1. In some cases, it's 3 for 1. But I believe in original D&D, it's 3 points. So a fighter could subtract 3 points of their intelligence and add 1 point to their strength. So what he's saying here is these scores that you're looking at, they have to have been the raw score. So not after you've adjusted that score based on swapping in for intelligence. And then it says, on the other hand, low strength will affect any character's fighting ability. So they're giving you bonuses here to hit and damage if you have a high strength, but only if you're a fighter. Other characters don't get that. So this was something where you can tell right away within a year of the game being published, for some reason, and I think we can all, there's probably a lot of reasons, but people were beginning to think that fighters maybe didn't get quite as many goodies as the other classes. Both magic users and clerics cast spells. Clerics can also turn undead. Now, fighters can wear armor, any armor, but so can clerics. And fighters can use any weapon. Well, they're the only class that can use any weapon. And that was really the fighter's main strength. And I think that a lot of people overlook it, because the idea is that fighters can use, for example, swords. Until this supplement comes out, Greyhawk, they were the only class that could use swords. Now, this is going to introduce the thief class, Greyhawk is, and thieves can use swords. But up until that point, fighters were the only class that can use swords. And why that's important is because when the dungeon master is stocking their dungeon, they're not picking what treasure goes into the rooms. They're rolling on tables. They're rolling to see what kind of treasure is going to be in this room. Is it going to be gold? Is it going to be gems? Is it going to be a magic item? And if it's a magic item, then they're going to roll on another table to figure out what kind of magic item. And one of the highest percentage chances of the magic item is going to be for a magic weapon. And then they're going to roll to figure out what kind of magic weapon it is. And once again, one of the highest percentage chances of the magic weapon that it's going to be is a sword. And the fighter is the only class that could use that magic weapon then. Clerics can't use edge weapons and magic users can't use swords at all. So the fighter's magical benefit, or one of this class benefits, is the fact that chances are sooner or later you're going to come across a magic sword, and the fighter's going to pick that up, and it's going to help him level up his game, so to speak. But a lot of people, I think, thought that was too kind of dependent on chance. rolling on these tables because maybe you don't roll a magic sword. Maybe you roll a potion instead, or you roll a scroll that only a magic user could use, like, etc. Right? So Gary Gygax in Greyhawk supplement is going to give fighters a bonus to hit and damage based on their strength score. And you see the scale is completely different. So it like the hit, what I mean by that is, again, if you're watching and not listening, an 18 strength gives you a +2 to hit, but a +3 to damage. It's not consistent. A 13 to 15 strength gives you +1 to hit, but it doesn't affect your damage at all. Okay, and then it says that fighters with a strength score of 18 are entitled to make an additional roll with percentile dice to determine if their exceptional strength is highly extraordinary, consulting the table below. And so if you had an 18 strength, if you rolled 3d6 and were lucky enough to have come up with 3 6s, and you've decided that you want to be a fighter because you've had this 18 strength, you then get to roll percentile dice to see if that strength is even a little bit better than 18. Okay, so I know this is kind of a foreign concept if you're like brand new to the game. You maybe never have seen this before if you started with 3rd or 4th or 5th edition. But this was a thing in earlier versions of the game. So if you see here, there's a 50% chance between 1 and 50 that your 18 strength, your 18 exceptional strength of 0, 1 to 50%, it's going to be exactly identical to if you just had a straight 18. Okay, but if you rolled 51 to 75 or 76 to 90% or 91 to 99% or 00, which is 100%, those bonuses get much better. So at strength 1800 or 100%, your hit probability is +4, meaning you're +4 to hit, and your damage is going to go up to +6. And you're going to open doors on a 1 to 6 on a D6 roll, which means you're going to open pretty much any door. And that your weight allowed, you're going to be able to carry a lot more for your encumbrance values. Okay, so why does Gary Gygax introduce exceptional strength in here? Well, I think the idea was, and again, this is something that a lot of people have talked about. I don't think that we have specifically in writing why he did it, but the general consensus is that, again, Gary was looking at some of these heroes from literature, folklore, but especially stuff like Conan the Barbarian. Actually, I have a whole video on why Gary Gygax preferred fighter type characters or martial type characters, which is weird because his most famous character, I think, would be Mordenkainen, who was, of course, a magic user. But Gary himself talked a lot about preferring warrior type characters because those were the characters that he saw on the cover paintings of the pulp novels that he was reading as a kid. Right. So again, Conan the Barbarian is a perfect example. And Conan is pretty much stronger than anybody that he comes across, at least other humans that he comes across. And so the exceptional strength system is a way to help distinguish, well, how exactly strong are you at a purely human level? So that a fighter with a strength of 1800%, that would be a Conan the Barbarian type fighter. That is like the epitome, the peak of human exceptionalism with strength. And other people could be strong, could have an 18 strength. A cleric might have an 18 strength. They don't get to roll exceptional strength though. So that person is only going to be, only going to be an 18. And it was a way to distinguish exceptional levels of strength to figure out exactly who is the strongest. Now, why didn't he just go up to 19? Well, partly it was because 19 was a distinguishing point of being, well, that's beyond human now. That is no longer a human level of strength. You've now moved into the fantasy realm of ogres and hill giants and things like that, right? So an 1800% or 18100%, that is still human level of strength. That's attainable by a human. It's extremely rare because, again, you'd have to roll 3d6 at when you're creating your character at first level and get 3 6s on your first roll, and that's your strength. And then you'd say, I'm going to be a fighter. And then you would roll percentile dice, and you have a 1% chance, because the only way you can get a 100 on a D percentile is again to roll 2 double zeros, to roll double zero. So that would be a 1% chance. So it's extremely rare, of course, unless you're cheating. But anyway, that's what strength's going to do in here. So that is a huge change that's going to happen to fighters in this particular game. Now, something else that's going to happen, this particular supplement, I should say, is that fighters are now going to change their hit dice, as are all the characters. Statistics regarding classes, additions, alternate hit dice, and hit point accumulation addition/amendment. This system is expressly aimed at raising fighters and lowering magic users. So again, there's a focus here on making fighters better than they were portrayed in the original game. With regard to hit points, which can be sustained, this system functions as follows. For each level attained, the character gets 1 die for hit points until the top normal level is reached. Thereafter, a certain number of hit points will be added for each level above normal that is attained. So this is the first supplement where we're going to see different character classes getting different hit die types. That is like old hat by now. Every edition of D&D since has done this, but it didn't happen until this supplement came out in 1975. This is going to give fighters a D8, magic users a D4, clerics a D6, and thieves a D4. So why was the thief a D4? Well, because originally it was sort of somewhat based on like being I want to say mundane, and I don't mean that like maybe quite the way that term is used usually, but they were sort of like the equivalent of a magic user. They like, instead of spells, they had all these little tricks and things that they could do, thief abilities, thief skills, that kind of stuff. But they were sort of slightly modeled on the idea of a magic user and swapping in spells for these abilities that they had. Okay. And originally the thief abilities worked automatically. They weren't percentage based. So I have a whole video in the history of the thief class, so you can learn more about that. Okay. And so fighters are going to get a D8. So they're no longer going to be hit points die 6 plus 1. This system is going to move them to die 8. Okay. For their hit points. Okay, so what else is going to happen in here? Well, once we've moved our character classes to different hit point types, hit die, there's going to be an alternative combat system here. And in that alternative combat system, it's going to tell us damage done by weapon type addition. If varying amounts of damage according to weapon type used is employed, the various monsters will likewise be subject to receive additional points of damage or dice of damage. But this is going to be the first table that we see where we're going to see that a dagger is going to do D4, a hand axe is going to do D6, and a sword is going to do D8 points of damage against a man-sized opponent. I should have pointed that out earlier. All the damage I'm talking about is versus smaller, medium-sized opponents, not large creatures. Okay, so those are going to be some changes that are made here, and so those are pretty significant. So what that means then is that our Greyhawk fighter is going to start out with average hit points of 4.5, which is the same as what we saw in OD&D, but instead of being a D6 plus 1, it's going to be a D8 straight. Now, they are going to get that bonus to their hit points of 1 from their constitution. That's fine. Their AC is still going to be the same as 4, their base AC of chainmail and shield. However, again, they're going to now get to add, oh, that was the other thing I forgot to mention in here. It says, dexterity affects both the ability of characters to act/react and fire missiles. It also is the prime requisite for thieves. And then it says, fighters with a dexterity of greater than 14 can use their unusual manual dexterity to attempt to dodge or parry opponents' attacks. For every point over 14, they are able to reduce their opponent's chances of hitting them by 1. And then it says in parentheses, 5%. So that means that our fighter then is going to get a bonus to their armor class based on their dexterity, but only fighters. Okay, so it says for every point above 14. So that means that our fighter who has a 15 dexterity, as we've said at the beginning, is going to get a plus or a bonus of 1 to their armor class. Okay, so their armor class is now going to be 3. Chainmail and shield is AC 4, and then they're going to reduce it by 1 based on their 15 dexterity. Now, their 2 hit bonus is based on their class and their level is still going to be, quote unquote 0, right? So they don't get any bonus to hit for being a fighter versus any other class at first level. However, they're going to get a +2 bonus based on their strength of 18. Now, what I've decided to do to keep this equal is I am using the exceptional strength, but I'm going to say their exceptional strength falls within that 1 to 50% range, which is that first line, which basically means it's no different than just a straight 18. That way it keeps it equal. But they are going to get a +2 bonus to hit. Their damage is now going to go to 4.5 points on average to 3.5, because you saw a sword in here on this table that we saw, the new table that was added for the weapons. a sword is going to do 1 to 8 points of damage. So that's an average of 4.5. However, this character with the high strength of 18, 0, 1 to 50%, is going to get a bonus to damage of 3 points. Okay, so they're going to do 4.5 plus 3, so 7.5 points of damage on a hit. That's very significant. That's a very big difference. Okay, their attack increases no change. So they're going to advance every 3 levels. There are no iterative attacks. They don't get multiple attacks per level. And their hit points or their experience points to reach 2nd level don't change. Okay, so those are the big kind of changes that are come out of here, that are going to come out of here. So something that is going to happen as well is right around the time Greyhawk comes out, slightly thereafter, the strategic review is going to come out. Volume 1, issue number 2 of the strategic review. Remember, this is the predecessor magazine to Dragon magazine. And in there's a column about changes and additions to the combat system in Dungeons and Dragons. And one of the things that Gary's going to talk about in this column is that fighters are going to get multiple attacks, but in a way that it's based on their hit dice, what level they are, and the hit dice of the opponents that they're fighting. And so it's not necessarily considered, I don't know if this would be considered official. So at a certain point, it's going to become known that anything that Gary writes in Dragon magazine in his column that usually has a copyright attached to it, or eventually it will, but that he writes is official for the game. So when he introduces new character classes and new, variant list level limits for some of the different non-human characters, or when he creates new spells or cantrips or things like that, well, that stuff starts to become considered official when he writes it in Dragon magazine. Strategic review is a little bit more muddied. It wasn't always clear who was writing the articles and things like that, but so I'm not sure that we would consider this official, but basically it indicates, this article says, that a fighter can attack a number of 1 hit dice creatures per round equal to their level. So put another way, if an 8th level fighter is attacking a bunch of 1 hit dice creatures, the 8th level fighter can attack 8 of those 1 hit dice creatures in a round. 6th level fighter can attack 6 1 hit dice creatures per round, etc. So this is going to be the start of a thing that's going to become a core part of the rules moving forward. And it first appears in this article in Strategic Review of fighters being able to fight lower level characters. And this is something that's really kind of coming out of chainmail, and the idea of like heroes being worth 4 quote unquote men, and superheroes being worth double the amount of a hero. So superheroes being worth 8 men. That men meaning a standard man-at-arms type character that has no special abilities. So a hero is the equivalent of 4 of those, meaning that they could take on 4 of those types of characters during a combat situation. Okay, so that's Greyhawk 1975. All right. Let's move now to 1977. We're going to have the release of the Holmes Basic set of Dungeons & Dragons. This is the called Holmes because it's edited by a man named Professor Holmes. And so we use that to distinguish it from the other versions of Basic, like this red one here. But this is released 1977. And we've talked about the Holmes before enough that, I think just check out the video on the Holmes set if you want to know why this set existed and what's kind of in here. But we're going to see some changes in this one, but this is only covering levels 1 through 3. Okay, so that is one of the things we're going to see here, but that still means we can compare a first level fighter. So this has our description. We're still using the term fighting men instead of fighters. And it says any human character can be a fighting man, and all halflings and dwarves are members of the fighter class unless they opt to be thieves. Elves are a combination of fighting man and magic user, as described later. Fighting men can use any weapon and wear any kind of armor, including magic weapons and magic armor. They cannot do other kinds of magic, however. As they advance in experience, they increase their hit dice and are harder to kill. After they reach the 4th level experience, they also increase their ability to get hits on an opponent, but experience levels that high are not discussed in this book, and the readers refer to the more complete rules in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. So just from that description right there, we know that a fighter or a fighting man in Holmes Basic D&D is going to get better at hitting once they hit level 4, but that's not going to be discussed in this book. But that's the same as it was in original Dungeons & Dragons and with the Greyhawk supplement. Okay, so what do we know about the fighters in Holmes in terms of their hit dice? Well, it tells us here that a veteran first level fighter has hit dice 1 8-sided hit dice. So Holmes has retained the Greyhawk structure of having 8-sided hit dice instead of the D6 plus 1 as an original Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, so that means that their hit dice are going to be an average of 4.5 at first level. And then how's that going to be modified by their dexterity? Or I'm sorry, by their constitution. Well, as we see here, a constitution of 18 is going to allow us to add 3 to each hit die. A constitution of 17 allows us to add 2. And a constitution of 15 to 16 allows us to add 1. I said our fighter at first level is going to have a 16 con. That means he's going to add 1 to his hit points. So his starting now is going to be 5.5. What is his AC going to be for having chainmail and shield? Well, let's find out. We're going to look at this combat table, die roll for monster to score a hit by different defender's armor class. So this tells us that armor class 4 is chainmail and shield, just like it was in Holmes and in Greyhawk. I'm sorry, in original D&D and in Greyhawk. So that's the armor class. Now we're going to go back to our table here to see how that's going to be modified by having a high dexterity, and we're going to find out that it is not modified. So in this case, Holmes has gone backwards, and instead of using the Greyhawk rules where a fighter could apply their high dexterity to improve their armor class, Holmes D&D is only going to give bonuses for dexterity to firing missiles, so missile fire. And so this is where I'm saying, like, Holmes is just so unique because sometimes it picks things that are from original D&D, sometimes it picks things that are from Greyhawk, and sometimes it picks things that are going to end up in advanced Dungeons and Dragons, but it's its own unique little thing here. It makes it one of the more fascinating early editions of Dungeons and Dragons to study. Okay, so we're not going to get a bonus to our armor class, so we're going to stay at armor class 4. And then what is our bonus to hit going to be at first level? Well, again, they don't have any improvement in their attacks versus any other character. So what I'm trying to do is compare them to, like, what would another character do? Is a fighter any better than any other character? And it turns out, no, they're not. They all have the same rolls at first level to hit the same armor classes. So there's no benefit there. And then what damage are they going to do with a sword? Well, Holmes, again, is going to go backwards. Every weapon in Holmes D&D does D6 damage. So it's not going to use the Greyhawk system where there's different damage by weapon type, even though it's adopted the Greyhawk system of different hit die types for different classes. It's going to retain the D6 damage for every weapon. So that means our sword is going to do 3.5 points of damage. And what is the benefit of our 18 strength? There is no exceptional strength in Holmes, so that's another one. It's gone backwards to original D&D, not using exceptional strength. And what's our strength bonus to hit and damage? And there's nothing. Okay, so again, we see here this table here of the ability score bonuses and penalties in Holmes is the one from original D&D, pretty much. So it makes it gives you no benefits for having high strength for your attacks and damage, or penalties for having low strength. So that's going to stay the same. Now, we talked about they are going to increase their ability to attack at 4th level, but that's not covered in Holmes. So we can't compare that really. They do not gain multiple attacks. There's no discussion here of fighters having multiple attacks. Even that thing that we just discussed from the strategic review of having higher level fighters being able to attack like 1 hit dice creatures like a number of times equal to their level, that is not discussed in Holmes. And then how many hit points, I keep saying hit points, how many experience points do they need to advance to 2nd level? Well, we see it's the same as original D&D, 2,000 to hit level 2 warrior. So there's really not a ton of art inside the Holmes book. There's a little bit, particularly in the monster section, probably has the most. But if we're looking for a depiction of a fighter, well, I would say this is one right here, this armored guy who's shooting on the cover. He's got a shield on his back and he's shooting a bow and arrow with this dragon. So that's pretty clearly a fighter. And then we have some fighter. I would say, again, this is most likely a fighter fighting a bunch of little creatures here on the inside cover. So that's what a fighter would have looked like, in the Holmes edition. All right. So that's Holmes. Now let's skip along and look at I'm going to look at the Moldvay edition of Basic. So I'm going to keep our 3 basic systems all in a row here, and then we'll go back in time and cover Advanced Dungeons & Dragons from 1978. But let's go forward to 1981, the Moldvay edition of Basic Dungeons & Dragons from 1981. And again, just as a reminder, if you're new to the channel, this is the one I started with. Not only the system that I started with, the edition I started with, this is the exact one that I got from as a gift, as an Easter gift from my mom. I started in fall of 1981 at school, and then my mom gave this to me for Easter in 1982. So here we have clearly a fighter on the cover. This is by Errol Otis. And then we've got another fighter here. This guy, again, is shooting a bow and arrow at this dragon, and I always thought this was an homage to this guy here. I thought that was kind of cool. Okay, but what are we going to get in the Moldvay version? So Moldvay is really going to make quite a few changes from the Holmes system in terms of the way that the mechanics of the way that the game works. Okay, but what are we going to get for our hit points? Well, fighters are going to use a D8 for hit points at level 1. So again, that's going to be an average of 4.5. Now, do they get a bonus for dexterity or for constitution? Yes, they do. So the Moldvay edition is the first edition that makes a standardized array of ability scores ranging from a penalty of -3 if you have a score of 3 in that ability score, and then a maximum bonus of +3 if you rolled an 18 in that score. So the only thing that's going to change on that is the charisma adjustments here for loyalty adjustment to reactions you see. And then very interestingly, the dexterity, the initiative adjustment is going to go from -2 to +2, not -3 to +3, but everything else you can see here, -3 for dexterity onto hit for missile fire, going all the way up to +3, and then armor class adjustment, etc. So our constitution, a 16 constitution is actually going to give us +2 hit points per hit die. That's a little bit higher than we've seen before. So this character is going to start out with an average of 4.5 and then add 2 because of their 16 con. Now, what does chainmail and shield look like in here as far as our armor class? Well, let's go to the table over here. And we see that chainmail armor gives us an AC of 5, and then shield deducts 1. So again, that's going to be an AC of 4. It's very important to remember that in this system, in Basic, Moldvay Basic, Holmes, Greyhawk Supplement, and Original D&D, the base armor class is 9. Which is no armor, as you see here. So clothing only is armor class 9. Okay. So do they get a bonus for their dexterity? Well, you just saw that on this table, but yes, they indeed do. So every character gets this. It's not limited to fighters, but we said that they had a dexterity of 15. That means that they're going to get a -1 bonus to their armor class, which means their armor class is going to go from 4 to 3. And again, just a reminder, we're getting better as we go down. We're using ascending armor class. So that's an improvement. Okay. So that's their dexterity. Now, what about their hit bonus? So what are they going to get to hit at first level? Do they have a bonus over anybody else? No. Their attack rolls are going to be exactly the same as everybody else at first level. They're going to improve at third level. Okay. But how much bonus do they get for having an 18 strength in their attacks? Well, you could probably guess if you've been keeping up here, but because they have an 18 strength, they're going to get a +3 to hit and damage. So that's different because original D&D, when it started to add bonuses to hit and damage for fighters, the hit bonus was different than the damage bonus. Okay. But in this case, it's going to be +3 across the board. So they're going to do, they're going to be +3 on their hit roll when they're rolling their die 20 to hit because of their 18 strength. There's no exceptional strength in here at all. That's not a thing in this edition of the game. And their sword in Moldvay Basic is going to do, this is a fun one. Let's flip to the page here. So we see our table here of weapons, and we see that now our swords are broken into different types. Short sword, normal sword, and two-handed sword. So this is the first edition where we see the differences between a short sword and a quote-unquote normal sword. Okay, but how much damage does it do? It doesn't tell us. Well, we're going to read that all the way over here in the combat section. Damage, it says if an attack hits, the DM must determine how much damage the attack has done. So that's a little bit different in Moldvay. The DM rolls the damage, not the player. It says damage from attacks by monsters is given with each monster description. The most common series of monsters have claw, bite, etc. Now we see amount of damage. All weapon attacks by characters, PCs or NPCs, will do 1d6 points of damage adjusted by strength and magical bonuses if applicable. Now it says, if the variable weapon damage system hereafter is used, check the weapon type. Well, as kids, we always use the variable weapon damage where it shows you how much damage a different weapon does. But the standard in Moldvay is that every weapon does D6, just like in Holmes Edition and just like in original D&D. So I'm going to use the standard and say that a sword, in this case, doesn't matter that if it's long or short, or we're using a normal sword, is going to do 3.5 points of damage. But this character gets to add 3 points extra because they have an 18 strength. So they're actually going to be doing an average of 6.5 points of damage per turn. Their combat ability is going to increase every 3 levels. Now, we're not going to find that out in basic, but we will find that out in the expert set that is going to come out a little bit later. And it's going to tell us how a character improves with their attack ability as they go up in level. I think it's mentioned in this book, but it's not dealt with specifically until you get to the expert set, which covers levels 4 through 14. Now, are they going to get multiple attacks per round? Nope. That never is a thing that happens in this edition of the game. And let's look at how many experience points they need to advance in level to second level. And we see here that a fighter needs 2,000 experience points to advance to level 2 warrior. So I told you to keep that 2,000 experience points number in mind. And that is because so far we've seen in every version of the game, original Holmes, I'm not going to count Greyhawk as a version, it's just giving us extra abilities, but original Holmes Basic and now Moldvay Basic, we're going to need 2,000 experience points to hit level 2. Okay, so that's our look at the fighter from the Moldvay edition of Moldvay Basic of Dungeons & Dragons from 1981. Now, let's just continue and cover the BECMI edition of Basic from 1983. That's the revision to this Moldvay system. And I just did a whole video talking about why that was made so quickly and what is different in the BECMI edition versus Moldvay. So I highly encourage you to check that out. It was a really fun video. But in the BECMI edition, basically, there's not going to be a lot of changes here. So starting hit points are going to be an average of 4.5. As a reminder, I don't own the BECMI edition in physical form. So just a quick peek at the PDFs here. So 4.5 starting hit points because they're going to use the same D8 as their hit points. They're going to get that same +2 bonus based on their 16 constitution. AC 4 for chainmail and shield, modified by dexterity of 15 gets them an extra bonus of 1. So AC 3 now. No bonuses to hit or anything like that at first level. They are going to get +3 based on their strength though. So that's going to be something from their 18. Now, also BECMI uses that same standard of Moldvay, which is that the standard system is that all weapons do D6 damage. Okay, so sword in BECMI Basic or any version of BECMI is going to do 6 points or D6 die of damage, so average 3.5, and then they're going to add that 3 points for their strength. So, what are the differences then in BECMI? Really, well, the main one's going to be is that once you get to the companion system and the companion set, which covers levels 15 through 25, and specifically the master set, which covers levels 26 through 36, at a certain point in there, it's going to tell us that higher level fighters can get more than one attack per round. This is the main difference between the BECMI fighter and the Moldvay fighter. So it's going to tell us that at 12th level, a fighter can get 2 attacks per round. At 24th level, they can get 3 attacks per round. And at 36th level, they can get 4 attacks per round. And then they're going to need 2,000 experience points to advance to level 2. So that's the BECMI fighter. Now, again, I am going to talk a little bit about some of these combat maneuvers in the later part of the video that appear in the companion set. There's also weapon mastery introduced in the master set. It's not a favorite from a lot of people, but you can hear more about that again in that video on the different versions of BECMI versus BX Dungeons and Dragons. If you're enjoying this video and are looking for ways to support the channel, there's 3 ways you can do that right now. First is by becoming a super fan and joining this other list of really great folks who have been able to contribute to the channel to help me upgrade my equipment, like getting a new microphone and basically a whole system for how I record my videos, these overhead shots, because the way I was doing it before was a little janky. And then, so you can do that by hitting that little heart icon with the $sign in it. Another thing you can do is visit my shop. I have 2 different shops now, one for kind of like general gear and then one for, I guess, merchandise. I don't know how to distinguish those 2. But if you're looking for a t-shirt, hoodie, mug, or tote bag, which you could call like a bag of holding even, you can get that at my spread shop. And then if you're looking for designs on notebooks, posters, or stickers, you can get that at my Redbubble shop. The notebooks are cool because they come in either blank, lined, or graph paper versions. And the lined version, I've been told, that someone asked the question if it was college rule or standard rule. What they told me was that it's 2 centimeters wide, I guess. And they said it's not a standard anything. So it doesn't fall into the either college rule or the standard rule. So hopefully that helps that person make that decision. But the graph paper one's cool because you could use it for like making your notes and dungeons and stuff and getting these cool designs. So the patent designs for the dice are probably the most popular. I think they're really fun. They look like blueprint designs and they're based on the original patents from these designs. I got approval to use these. And then I have my designer kind of clean them up because the originals are not in great shape. And then, but there's other designs there as well that I had made specifically for fans of the channel. So if you're into old school D&D, like the classic classes or ability scores might work for you. So definitely please check those out and let me know if you bought something. I'd love to see a photo of you wearing it or using it at the table or whatever. So send that in. That'd be awesome. All right. And then the last thing you can do is by buying my supplement, Alchemy, Explosives, and Inventions. It was created for Old School Essentials, which is essentially the version of the game, the retro clone that works with Moldvay BX, but it really is going to work with any of these editions of Dungeons & Dragons that we're talking about today from the TSR era. It's got 3 new classes, Alchemists, Demolitionists, and Inventors. It's got 15 class concepts that are like backgrounds. It's got dozens and dozens of random tables in here. It's got new equipment. There's a 3-story guild hall with maps, secrets, intrigue, NPCs, that kind of thing. There's guidance in here for running an expertly themed campaign. So all that is available as a PDF or print-on-demand product in either a plain white or in a parchment background. So you can choose the one that you like the best over at Drive-Thru RPG. And I'd really appreciate it. And if you do pick it up, let me know what you think of it. And if you've ever used it in your game, I'd love to hear. All right. So thank you so much for your support. Let's get back to talking about fighters and these different editions of Dungeons & Dragons. And specifically Advanced Dungeons & Dragons from 1978, the Player's Handbook. So as a reminder, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons came out over the course of 3 years, at least the 3 core books that we call them now. So the Monster Manual came first in 77, Player's Handbook came in 1978, and this is where we got our rules for playing fighters. Now, what's going to happen here in terms of our fighters at first level with their hit dice? Well, this is the first version of the game that we're going to see where a fighter is going to use a D10 for their hit dice, not a D8. So that first happens here in Advanced D&D in 1978. So that's why the Moldvay system is different, because it goes back. It goes back to the D8 that was first proposed in Greyhawk and was then used also in Holmes, but it doesn't go all the way back to the D6 from original D&D. But Advanced D&D had come out by this point, and it doesn't use the D10. It only uses the D8. Okay, so that means that this fighter is going to start with an average of 5.5 hit points at first level. But how is that going to be modified by their constitution? Well, let's have a look here, and it's going to tell us the hit point adjustment. We said that they had a constitution of 16. That's going to give them a +2 to their hit points. So they're going to start out now at 7.5 hit points at first level on average. Okay. Now, what is this down here? We'll look at it since we're here at a constitution of 17. It says +2, and then in parentheses it says +3, and there's an asterisk, and then 18 is +2, and then it says in parentheses +4 with an asterisk. Well, that's because this bonus applies only to fighters. So at a 17 and 18, you could get either a +3 or a +4 to your hit points, but only if you were a fighter. Now, in this case, fighter is going to include the subclasses of paladins and rangers, so they would also get that benefit. But every other class, if you were a cleric and had an 18 constitution, you'd only get +2 to your hit points. It would top out at +2. Okay, now, what about our armor class for this fighter? Chainmail and shield. What's that going to look like? We see right here that chainmail plus shield is going to give us an armor class of 4. Now, that's interesting because the base in AD&D has changed to 10. So no armor is going to give us a base of 10, whereas in all these editions over here that we've talked about before, the base was 9. So it's changed the base, but it's also kept chainmail and shield as being an armor class of 4. And partly that's because they've introduced all these other different kinds of armor in here to kind of, add in some more granularity to the armor class. So that's a little bit different. And then let's check out and see what kind of bonus they're going to get to their armor class based on their dexterity. Well, this character has a 15 dexterity, we said. So they're going to get a -1 defensive adjustment. So that means that 4 is going to go to a 3. So that's very consistent. So the chainmail and shield armor class of being a base of 4 for all these different editions is exactly the same. It's chainmail is AC 5, and then when you add the shield, you go to AC 4. It's just that the difference in what counts as the worst armor class or unarmored armor class changes from 9 in original Holmes, Moldvay, and BECMI, and it changes to 10 for AD&D. Okay, so now we've looked at the armor class. What about their bonus to attacks? What's going to happen for their attack bonus? Well, nothing really. So again, it's the standard, right? So they are going to start out at first level attacking like everybody else with no extra bonuses because they're fighters. However, this fighter does have 18 strength, and this is AD&D. It's going to use the Greyhawk system of exceptional strength. And we see that on this table here. Now, we did say that this character was going to have 1801 to 50%. Okay, and this is going to tell us that if you have that strength, you're going to add +1 to your hit probability, and you're going to add +3 to your damage. Okay, so again, the AD&D is not consistent. Moldvay is the first one where there's any consistency across every ability score for every bonus and penalty. Okay. Sorry, I hit my little camera arm here. So this character is going to get a +1 to hit at first level based on their strength. Okay. And then they're going to get a +3 to hit based on their +3 to their damage when they attack for having that 1801 to 50% strength. And what kind of damage are we looking at? Well, in this particular case, swords are broken up much more granular, and we're going to use long sword. We're going to assume that that is the equivalent of a quote-unquote normal sword. And that is going to do 1 to 8 points of damage for a small or medium-sized creature. So 4.5 points for longsword and +3 for this 18 strength. Now, at what point does this character get better at attacking? Every 2 levels. So that's going to be a difference. They're going to get better starting at 3rd level in their attack progression instead of at 4th level that we've seen before. So that's going to be a little bit more consistent. And also, for the first time in AD&D, we're going to see a more consistent way of them getting bonuses to their attacks, multiple attacks. You see fighters, paladins, and rangers. Why do they group them together? Because in this version of the game, rangers and paladins were subclasses of fighters. They weren't standalone classes. Okay, and so it's going to tell us that at levels 7 through 12, a fighter is going to get 3 attacks every 2 rounds. So what does that mean? Okay, because this is a weird quirk of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, but it basically means on the first round, they get to attack once, and then on the second round, they get to attack twice. Something else that it says down here is it says, this excludes melee combat with monsters of less than 1 hit die and non-exceptional 0-level humans and semi-humans. That is, all creatures with less than 1 8-sided hit die. All of these creatures entitle a fighter to attack once for each of his or her experience levels. So this is going back to that article that we saw in Strategic Review. So now in this case, it's anybody with less than 1 full 8-sided hit die. But it's the same. It's the same concept that the fighter is allowed to attack them for as many levels that the fighter has attained up until that point. Okay, so that is going to be core and baked into the system. It's not in an article that we have to look at later. Okay, so then we see also here, I guess I should point out that the fighter at level 13 and up is going to get 2 attacks per round, and that's where they're going to top out. So that they're going to top out of getting 2 attacks per round. So that's the fighter in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So we talked about how the Constitution scaling is only for fighters at levels 17 and 18 that get the extra benefit. Okay. And that now one of the things that happens based on the fighter's attack progression, because they get better at 3rd level and then at 5th level, but the increments that they get better are in increments of 2. So a fighter at level 3 improves his or her attack ability by +2. Okay. So one of the things that people said back then was that the DM might have the option to, instead of doing it in chunks of 2, just flatten it out and give them a flat +1 at every level, so that at 2nd level they would be +1 and then at 3rd level +2, instead of waiting to get to +2 at 3rd level. So some people did that, some people didn't. It's not, I don't think it's a core official part of the rule, but it was something that you could figure out by looking at the attack tables. So that's the fighter in Advanced D&D. Okay. Now, in 1985, you're going to see the release of Unearthed Arcana. This is a somewhat controversial book for people because of the changes that it started to make. And one of the things that's going to happen in this book is we're going to see the debut of something called weapon specialization. Okay, so one of the things that changed in Advanced D&D, and we have to look at this in order for us to understand how weapon specialization is going to work, is that, as you saw before, a key benefit of the fighter was that they could use any weapon. And in fact, let's just look really quickly at the description of the fighter. It says the principal, this is from Advanced D&D Player's Handbook, so I'm going backwards for a second. The principal attribute of a fighter is strength. So again, it doesn't really describe the fighters down here. It just tells you what they can do, but there's no description given as to like what constitutes being a fighter. It's just giving you, their mechanical abilities and, using different magic weapons, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So the thing I wanted to point out is here. This is the weapon proficiency table. So in original D&D, the benefit of the fighter was that they could pick up and use any weapon, but at any time could they do that. In Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, we're going to have the debut of weapon proficiencies. And this is going to tell us that a fighter starts out with 4 weapon proficiencies at 1st level. And they take a -2 non-proficiency penalty if they try to use a weapon that they're not proficient with. And they add proficiencies in weapons once every 3 levels. Okay, so you can see that here in this table. So what are weapon proficiencies? Well, then a fighter can use any weapon, but at 1st level, they have to pick only 4 that they're actually proficient in, which means if they come across a weapon that they're not proficient in and pick it up to use it, including a magic weapon, they're going to take a -2 penalty to use that weapon. So this is going to be a change in the fighting class, because it actually kind of does reduce a little bit of their efficacy, because they no longer have that ability to come across any magic weapon, pick it up and use it with no penalty. Okay, so Unearthed Arcana is going to make a change by saying that fighters can do something called weapon specialization. And it's described here. And it says only members of the fighter class and the ranger subclass can make use of weapon specialization. So what about paladins? Well, Unearthed Arcana is going to shift the paladin from being a subclass of fighter and make paladins a subclass of cavalier, which is a new core class that debuts in this book. which is whatever. I've talked about it before. Okay, so the gist of it is that you reduce the number of weapon proficiencies that you have. So you have to swap in some of your weapon proficiencies, and it says it counts as 2 weapon proficiency slots. So instead of having 4, you could take 2 of those and say, I'm going to be proficient in, or I'm going to be specialized in, let's say, a sword. And then you would get 2 more proficiencies, okay, because you've used 2 to become specialized with the sword. But specialization means that you're going to be +1 to hit and +2 to damage with that weapon on top of any strength bonuses that you're going to get, okay? And you're going to increase your number of attacks per round. So if you are specialized with the weapon at levels 1 through 6, you already start out where you can make multiple attacks per round with that weapon at the 3 attacks every 2 rounds. Now with bows and missile weapons, it's a little bit different, but the gist of it is, it's, say you were fighting, you picked a sword, which is probably what you're going to do. Then at first level, in addition to your strength, you're going to be +1 to hit with the sword and +2 damage. And you're going to get to attack with that sword 3 times every 2 rounds. Okay, so that's weapon specialization with the fighter. So what that means is, as far as their hit points, they're going to be the same 5.5 average. Using the D10, they're going to get that +2 bonus for their constitution. Their chainmail shield is going to be AC 4. Their bonus to armor class based on their dex is going to be 1. Their to hit bonus, however, is going to be 1. So now they're going to be a +1 to hit, and then they're going to get an additional +1 for their strength. So +2 to hit, because again, we've done 18 strength, 0-1 to 50%. And then their damage is going to be average of 6.5, because it's going to be 4.5 for the weapon and then +2 for the specialization, and then an additional +3 for their strength. So it's really 9.5 points of damage on average per round. That's huge. That's a first level character doing that amount of damage. It's a lot. Okay, it's not a lot if you're used to like 5e where you do these crazy optimized builds and you're already doing 30 points of damage at first level, but when you're comparing it to these original editions that are all kind of built on the same framework, even though Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is supposed to be, quote unquote, a different game, a separate game, it's really using the same rules engine for the most part. And everything else being equal, doing 9.5 points of damage at first level for a fighter using Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Unearthed Arcana weapon specialization versus a fighter from original D&D doing 3.5 points of damage, that's a big difference. Okay, now they are going to increase their attacks every 2 levels, like we talked about. And they're going to start out, again, having multiple attacks at, 3 attacks every 2 rounds at first level. And then at 7th level, they're going to get 2 attacks per round, being specialized with that weapon. Okay, now, I think the one thing that we forgot to talk about as we're talking about advanced D&D is the experience points that we need to go up and level up to 2nd level. So that's going to be here. And we need 2,001 experience points to get to level 2. But it's essentially the same as we've seen from every other version of the game, 2,000. So even though Advanced Dungeons & Dragons is a different game, as told by Gary Gygax, this is a separate game, it's using the same experience points tables for fighters for the most part. So there's really no great drawing of individually of a fighter here. I mean, this one probably is the best one. This description, this picture here, with all the different races: dwarf, elf, and half orc, and human. This one is the paladin. This is the paladin in hell, so we know that that's not a fighter. And then there's your thief and stuff. So that's probably the best depiction of a fighter, other than maybe this guy on the cover by Trampian, and that's clearly a fighter. I guess it could be a cleric wearing full armor, but most likely that's a fighter. Okay, so that is our look at Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons with Unearthed Arcana. And next we're going to go to the Player's Handbook from 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons in 1989. And this is going to be where we top out, where we're going to stop with our look at the fighter. Okay, for the TSR editions, that is. Now, something different in here. 2nd edition Advanced D&D is going to create 4 classifications of characters: warriors, mages, priests, and rogues. Okay, and then within that, you're going to find your classes. So there's these giant kind of classifications. And so fighters fall under the warrior classification, a warrior group. They call them groups. And it says, here's your fighter, and it gives you all the info that you need. But it's going to say the fighter is a warrior and expert in weapons, and if he is clever, tactics, and strategy. There are many famous fighters from legend: Hercules, Perseus, Hiawatha, Beowulf, Siegfried, Cuchulainn, Little John, Tristan, and Sinbad. History is crowded with great generals and warriors: El Cid, Hannibal, Alexander the Great, Charlemagne, Spartacus, Richard the Lionheart, and Belisarius. Your fighter could be modeled after any of these, or he could be unique. A visit to your local library can uncover many heroic fighters. So this is really one of the first times where we're going to see a description of what exactly is a fighter and what are some inspirations for us to understand what a fighter is and what it can do. Okay, but in general, in second edition, the fighter's going to follow pretty much exactly the same as what we saw in first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And that's deliberate because this wasn't intended to be a complete revamp. It was intended to be kind of just a slight revision and cleaning up of the first edition rules. And so they made a big deal back in the day of saying that like your first and second edition books should be very, very compatible. That was a deliberate design decision. So they're going to use D10 for their hit points, giving us 5.5 average at first level. We're going to get a +2 bonus for our 16 Constitution. Chainmail and Shield's going to give us an AC of 4, and we're going to get a +1 bonus to that based on our 15 Dexterity. Our 2 hit bonus is going to be exactly the same model that we saw in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons first edition, meaning it's going to improve every 2 levels by a factor of 2. So a lot of people would flatten that out, and starting at second level just give you +1 to hit. Okay, and then your bonuses to hit are going to be 1 for your strength, and then your damage is going to be 6.5 for your sword, and that's going to be because we're using weapon specialization that is baked into the game. Weapon specialization for fighters, and it's only for fighters. So in this case, it doesn't apply to rangers. Paladins are now back as kind of being this subclass of this warrior group. There are no cavaliers in second edition Advanced D&D. So fighters are unique in that they're the only ones that can specialize. So that +1 that they're going to get to hit is in addition to the +1 that they're going to get from their strength. So they're going to be +2 total because we've specialized in a weapon. Our sword, let's say we've specialized in the sword, is going to do 4.5 points of damage. It's going to do so an average of from the D8 plus an additional 2 points from our weapon specialization plus an additional 3 points from our strength. Okay, so in all cases, the fighter from second edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons using weapon specialization is exactly the same as a fighter using weapon specialization using the Unearthed Arcana rules. Okay, so that's the big kind of difference that comes in second edition Advanced D&D is that weapon specialization is only available to fighters. Now, there were some other books that came out. There's there's the Rules Cyclopedia for the BECMI edition of Basic Dungeons and Dragons. There's the Easy to Master. There's Classic D&D. All those use the same rules as the BECMI system. There's the Complete Fighter's Handbook that's going to come out for second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. There's really not a ton in there as far as like mechanics for changing how combat works. So not enough where I felt it was necessary to get into it. I did a whole video on the complete handbooks if you want to check that out. And that was all optional, right? It wasn't a core part of the rules. And then the player's options books are going to come out late in the second edition era. They're going to start to presage a lot of things that we're going to see in third edition. You've got skills and powers, and you have combat and tactics. So the combat and tactics book is kind of fun, but this is where we start to see things that are going to become feats and stuff like that in third edition. But again, not a core part of the rules, so I'm not going to cover that in this video. So that's really kind of the core look at all these different fighters across editions, and we can see the similarities and the changes. So one last thing would be the experience points that we need in second edition for our fighter to advance up to second level. It's going to need 2,000. Okay, so across the board for all these different editions, that is the one thing that remains consistent. The experience points needed to attain second level are 2,000. The hit die is going to change. The damage that you're going to do with your sword, your bonuses from your ability scores to your hit points, armor class, and attacks are going to change. Whether you get multiple attacks per round is going to change, and when those occur is going to change. But the one thing that's consistent is that it takes 2,000 experience points to reach second level. So I thought that was kind of funny. But that's our look at the fighter. And then next up, we're going to look at how can we look at some of these other additions and things that they do to kind of make the fighter a little bit more unique mechanically using combat maneuvers. Okay, so really quickly, I wanted to talk about some ways that other games deal with trying to make fighters more unique from a mechanical standpoint. I'm not saying that I agree necessarily that you need to do that, but just some ideas. So in the BECMI edition of Dungeons & Dragons, in the companion set, I just talked about this again in that last video, but they introduced this idea of these different, maneuvers or things that fighters can do during combat. And it's very specific. There's a lot of role-playing restrictions attached to who can and can't do these kinds of things. But they have like a smash where you take -5 to hit. But if you do hit, you get to add your entire strength score to your damage, not just the bonus, but it's in addition to the bonus. Okay. And, you get to plus your damage that you would normally do. Okay. And then they have parry, which means attackers are like -4 to hit you, but you can't attack. And then they have disarm, which is worded very awkwardly, but the idea is that you make an attack, and if you hit, instead of doing damage, the opposer rolls a d20. They have to apply their dexterity bonus. They have to apply your dexterity bonus. And if the result is higher than their dexterity score, then you have disarmed them of their weapon. So again, a little clunky and a little cumbersome. But this concept or this idea of fighters doing different things and that aren't really dealt with in the rules, for some people, they want to have that explained. They want to have mechanics behind it. So an example would be here. I just talked about this somewhat recently. I did a review of Castles and Crusades. So this is a game that is published by Trollers Publishing. And just see my review to learn more about this game. But they have this whole section here on combat maneuvers with called shots and charging and close supporting fire and disarming, dodging, evade, flank attack, offensive focus, parry, push, reach, rear attack, receiving charge, shield blow, shield wall, trip, and 2-weapon attack. And these are things that are available during combat. And the idea is that rather than just continually I hit it with my sword and then I move and I hit the next guy with my sword, you're using these different maneuvers, and it's giving you mechanics on how to adjudicate them if you want to do stuff like this in combat. It's pretty easy to use. It's pretty well explained, and there's a lot of different ideas in here. Okay. And it goes on and on though. So if you look at example, this is Carcass Crawler Magazine, which is the official magazine for Old School Essentials. Well, and this is issue number 1, and they implement something called combat talents. And so you look here on page 28, and we see that an optional rule for fighters, it says groups who prefer fighters to have a little more mechanical complexity may allow characters to select one of the following combat talents at 1st level, 5th level, and 10th level. And they have cleave, defender, leader, main gauche, slayer, and weapons specialist. So you can see the details here. But again, it's giving you mechanics for dealing with things like that in combat. And then Dungeon Crawl Classics is going to do that as well. They have what's called Mighty Deeds. And these are things that you can do during combat, like blinding attacks or disarm or pushbacks, trips and throws, precision shots, and rallying maneuvers. And they have some really kind of fun ideas. I like Dungeon Crawl Classics a lot. I love the flavor of it. And so it talks a little bit in here about how those maneuvers work. And it says, don't be limited to these. Come up with your own ideas for Mighty Deeds. And it gives you this whole page of ideas in here. So that's something that you can do if you feel that you need mechanics to go with these, different kinds of maneuvers. I don't do it that way in the game that I run for my daughter and her friends. I let them just kind of tell me, what is it that they're trying to do? And I just deal with it as a straight roll. So if they say they want to trip somebody, I have them explain how they think that they're doing it, why they think they should be able to, like what are the circumstances. And then I just have them make the straight attack roll. And if that attack roll hits, rather than do the damage, they do the thing. They do the trip, they do the disarm, whatever it is that they're trying to do. I haven't found it necessary to add a lot of fiddly mechanics in there to do that. I also like how it gives my players the ability to describe what it is that they're doing, and because it gives them some narrative ability and it helps them engage in the game a little bit more. Now, another thing that I've done in the past on my blog is I created this series called Make Your Characters Weird, and it started with fighters. And the idea was that you don't need mechanics to make your character unique, just come up with a fun idea. So I have a whole D20 table, and this is something, if you want this, you can get it on my blog, or if you want it like in a format that's like easier to use, like a PDF, send me an email. My email will be in the show notes below. I'll put it up here on screen as well. But you can send me an email and I'll send that to you as a PDF. But it's ideas like things like that they collect trophies. So I said specifically teeth, although it doesn't have to be that. But I said, like, maybe this fighter collects the teeth of his fallen enemies and keeps them in a little sack, and that he talks to them or thinks that the teeth are talking back to him or her and giving tactics and strategies, but only the fighter can hear it. Now, are the teeth really talking or not? Who knows? But you don't need mechanics for that. It's just like a fun little unique thing. Another one, and I did this in my daughter's game, one of the fighter players, she's moved away now, doesn't play, but she was followed by an unkindness of ravens, which is the raven equivalent of like the murder of crows. For ravens, it's called an unkindness. But 4d4 ravens followed around and would like eat the corpses like after combat, right? But also, when they did that, that was how the fighter healed damage. So rather than from resting, they healed their normal like damage from resting when these crows were feeding after a battle. But that meant that the fighter, when she slept, she was always having nightmares around. So again, no mechanical change. She's still getting the benefit of resting. It's just that she's not resting. The crows are feeding. And when she does sleep, she has nightmares. So just little tweaks like that can add a lot of fun. And they're just role-playing things that can make your fighter unique. So again, I think that's another way to look at it rather than just tacking on more mechanics. But that's just how I deal with things like this. And I would love to hear how you deal with them. So leave that in the comments below and let me know what you thought about learning the history of the fighter through the different TSR editions of Dungeons & Dragons. I would love to hear what you thought about this video, and leave your suggestions again in the comments below of other videos that you'd like to see in the future. So that's going to wrap this up. And I would like to, again, thank you for watching. And when you're down there leaving your comments below, make sure to check out places where you can join me on social media. You'll find links to my blog, and then you'll find links to all those sources I talked about earlier, like my shop and my book on Drive-Thru RPG, and all of that is going to be in the show notes below. So thank you so very much for watching. Stay safe, happy gaming, and I will talk to you next time. This is a special part of the bonus content. I'm going to do a quick unboxing here, but this is a box I got from the folks over at Emperor's Choice. Emperor's Choice Games and Miniatures. And after I did my video on the Arduin books, the first trilogy, and a lot of people in the comments mentioned that there are like more than those 3 books. I knew that. I should have mentioned that in the video. I was just covering the first 3, like that original trilogy. But anyway, the folks at Emperor's Games tracked me down very nicely and gave me some really nice compliments on the video. Said they really enjoyed it and they were super excited to see how many people were watching it and asking questions or commenting on it. And they, in the video I mentioned that I didn't own the books physically. I only had the PDFs. And so they offered to send me some of their books. So I'm assuming that's what this is. They sent me 2 packages. So let's open this up and see what we got. Now, I'm not going to like review this or anything right now. This is just kind of just showing you the nice stuff that they sent. Okay, so first off, we have this bag here. It says Arduin, Bloody Arduin. And, it's a set of cards. 108 cards, 8 suits, 4 Dragon Wilds, and 19 sobriquet, I believe is how you say that. Swords and Dragons. That's pretty cool. Okay. Ooh, it's in a really nice bag, too. I didn't catch that. This is really nice. kudos on the packaging. Oh, that's really cool. I'm not going to open these quite yet. Just wanted to kind of show you guys. All right, and then let's have a look at what else is in the box here. I just thought, since my name's Martin, and said, what's in the box? I was like, what's in the box, Marty? Bonus points if you guys get that reference. Okay, here it is, the Ardenwen Trilogy. Now, my understanding from the research I did is that this is like a later reprinting, obviously, but it's collecting those first three of the books that I talked about in my video, all in like with this nice hardback volume here, which is super cool. So that's really nice. Looks like there's some cards in here. Oh yeah, are these? Maybe they're stickers. Ooh, I think. Look at this. Funky Frank Pale Ale. Oh, that's so cool. That's right up my alley. That's really nice. Okay, very cool. Put that back in here. And wow, they sent just a lot of neat stuff. So thank you guys from Emperor's Choice. Wow. Okay. Another, like, I love the packaging, like these Ziploc bags, like these printed Ziploc bags. It's packed full of all these other books here. And they all say they're by David Hargrave, so I'm assuming that these are reprintings of the stuff that Dave Hargrave wrote back in the 70s and 80s. Again, as we talked during the video, he unfortunately passed away in 1988. So yeah, I think these are like the future, you know, the further volumes in the series. Okay, let's put that over here for a second. Wow. Okay, so here's another one. The Ardenwen Map Index. Okay. Well, I think I know what I'm going to be doing with that, which we'll go over in just a second here. This is amazing. Okay, Vaults of the Weaver. Delivers 6 modules designed and written by Dave Hargrave. Okay, so these are like the adventures that take place in Ardenwen. Wow. There's just a ton of stuff. It's amazing. Okay, so just more and more. It keeps going. Some more nice of the stickers. And these might be art prints, I'm guessing. Or no? What is this? Oh, these are well, this is obviously a map. Okay, yeah, maybe these are some art pieces and maps. Okay. So I know I'm going through this quickly, never fear. I mean, at some point I will be doing a more in-depth video on this stuff. Given the amount, I'm probably going to have to break it up into a few videos. We'll see. The Ardenwen Artifact Weapon and Monster card set contains 42 cards that you cut out. That's really cool. Okay. And what else do we have here? Wow, this is a monster book right here. The Legendary Lands of Ardenwen, World Book of Cass? Oh, you guys tell me how you say that. This is a beast. Wow. How many pages is this? It's over 800 pages, this thing. That's crazy. Okay, so that's the first part of the stuff that I got. And then this is the other package they sent. As you can see, it doesn't fit into my camera here. It's this giant box. got some cotton packaging here. Okay, this is exactly what I thought it was. Okay, well, first off, this is, wow, check this out. This is Arduin, Bloody Arduin, we have your back. I know it's kind of hard to see because it's so close to the camera. It's a back scratcher. it's a branded back scratcher. That's awesome. Okay. And then there's 2 tubes in here. Gonna move the box out of the way. So these 2 tubes, wow, even the tubes have printing on them. I mean, this is just a first-class job of packaging. Okay, yeah, these are maps, of course. Now, obviously, they're not going to fit on the screen here. I'm going to have to figure out how to do this when I review them. Wow, it's really nice paper. Okay. Now, my understanding, I believe, is that they did a Kickstarter for these maps, and these are like reprints of some of the original maps, obviously kind of like, you know, made nicer and stuff. Yeah, I'm not going to open the other one. I'll save that for the review video. This is a really nice package from the folks at Emperor's Choice, so I think I can safely say if you ever were to order something from them, you can definitely be sure that it's going to be packaged really well, and you know, maybe you'll get some extra goodies or something in. I mean, there's so many cool things in here. So once again, thank you so much to the folks at Emperor's Choice Games and Miniatures, and then also to all my viewers who watched that video on Arduin, which is what got them excited to see that people were still interested in these products and supplements, you know, decades after they were first published. So thanks for that, and be on the lookout. It's probably going to be sometime over the summer for more Arduin goodness here on Daddy Roll the One. And now for the bonus content, what I was drinking, what I was listening to when I made my notes for this video. So the drink here is something called a bee's knees, and that is not egg white foam on the top. That is from honey. So a bee's knees is really just kind of like a gin sour, but the simple syrup or the sugar portion has been replaced by a honey syrup. So this is, to scale it the right way, it's 8 parts gin, 3 parts lemon juice, and 2 parts honey syrup. That's the recipe I use. However, I've seen other recipes, some of which even add like orange juice, which I don't do. So it's like for my glass, it's 2 ounces of gin, 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice, and 1/2 ounce of honey syrup. Honey syrup is just honey and warm water to dilute, equal parts. And I actually added a few drops of grapefruit bitters to mine because I had it served to me that way, actually with a lemon or a grapefruit peel the last time I had one of these. And I thought it was kind of nice. However, once again, I'm out of grapefruits. The traditional garnish is lemon peel, but I like it with the grapefruit peel. So cheers to you all. Yeah, it's really nice. It's very refreshing, which is part of the reason I made it today, because today, in just a few short hours, is going to be the summer equinox here where I live in Southern California. So the longest day of the year, and the point where we're going to transition. So now the days are going to start from this point on getting shorter until we get to the winter solstice around the 21st of December. But this drink was originally created during the Prohibition era. So I've heard it. Some people say it was created in 1921, I think at the American Bar in Paris. But then I've seen other people say, no, it was 1929 when it was first recorded. So, but somewhere in there during the Prohibition era in the United States. And the name bee's knees was just a phrase used at the time to kind of describe something as being like the best. So you would say something was the bee's knees or the cat's pajamas or the devil's whiskers. All of those phrases kind of mean like the thing is the best. So cheers to you for being the best. I'm going to take another sip here. Now, what's kind of fun about cocktail recipes, of course, is that if you just change one thing, you have a completely different drink, and you get to change the name. So if you swap out the gin in this for bourbon, then you've made what's called the Gold Rush Typically, that would be served on a large rock in a glass as opposed to up like this one. And if you do something as simple as add a couple dashes of bitters, orange bitter specifically, and a couple dashes of absinthe, then you create a drink known as the last surviving Confederate widow, or the last living Confederate widow, something like that. So just changing a few short things. So that's part of the things I'm trying to get across on the channel, is that cocktail making doesn't have to be difficult. It can be fun. And there's really just a few recipes that you kind of just change one or two ingredients and you've made a whole new cocktail. Okay, so that's the cocktail. However, I was talking about today being the summer equinox later day, meaning it's the first day of summer. So I thought, what better than to feature the song Summertime. So Summertime from the opera Porgy and Bess, jazz opera. I don't know exactly how to create it, by George Gershwin, as you see here. And then lyrics by Dr. DuBose Hayward, and also Ira Gershwin. I can't fit this in on my screen here, but George's brother Ira wrote the lyrics. But this is a copy of the album, and this is the version by Ella Fitzgerald and Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong, with an orchestra conducted by Russell Garcia. And so Porgy and Bess is a very classic American musical, opera-ish. Like, it's not opera. Don't think opera. It's musical is probably a better word. But the original featured all African-American cast, because it is a story. It's a folk story of African-Americans, specifically a man named Porgy, who is a disabled kind of like beggar living in Charleston. And he's trying to save his girl, Bess, from her violent lover. And also from a drug dealer that she has been kind of hanging around with. And so it's a really great story. The music is very beautiful. And the song Summertime comes from this album. So this musical, it's played throughout the musical. It's kind of like the main kind of through song. But, the Summertime and the Livin's Easy, that's the song, right? Now, if you don't want the vocal version, although that's my preference with Ella and Louis, they are the perfect pair for each other. I've talked about them here on the channel before. Miles Davis recorded that album with the Gil Evans Orchestra when he was with Columbia. And this is all instrumental, okay? So he does Summertime on here, you see, which is great. And there's a couple little additions on here that are really nice. Gone, Gone, Gone specifically was created for this album, but it's based within the music here. So definitely check the Miles one out. And then, of course, if you're more into modern music, Sublime did a song that they are very well known for, very associated with the band. Whoops. Called Doing Time. And if you've heard that song, it's picking up lyrics from Summertime, and the music is based on Summertime. So that song, first written in 1935, still relevant all the way here in the modern music era. So, I just thought it would be fun to kind of feature some Summertime, given that it's the first day of summer. So I hope that you check some of these albums out and let me know if you do. Let me know if you try the drink. And cheers, and I will talk to you next time.